We listed 16 teams we think will compete for the national championship, the right to be called the first champion of the college football playoff. Here they are, picked by our 13 experts, the same amount of people that'll be on that playoff selection committee. 6 teams from the SEC. No other conference has more than 3 schools. And speaking of the SEC, at this time a year ago, the Auburn Tigers were essentially paper Tigers, but they came out of nowhere to play in the national title game. So essentially, bottom line, this list is fun, but it's by no means firm because certain teams are going to sneak in and certain teams are going to plummet out. Give me a school on that list, and we're going to show them to you again on the screen here in just a little bit, that's not going to end up being a contender, a player, when all is said and done, Mark.
You know, I think they all have their own issues. I think Florida State's the most complete team on that list. I think Texas A&M, just the fact that Johnny Manziel's gone, along with Jake Matthews, a first-round pick, their left tackle, and also wide receiver Mike Evans, who was a big play weapon on the perimeter. But you look at the schedule, open the season at South Carolina on a Thursday night, play at Alabama, play at Auburn, close the season against Missouri and LSU at home. I was out there in the spring, talked to Mark Snyder, their defensive coordinator. He still feels he's a year or two away from having an SEC caliber defense. And then you throw in a new quarterback, probably Kenny Hill. I think it could be a bit of a rebuilding job in College Station.
Is it okay if I pull a whole conference out of this conversation?
Go ahead.
I'm the West Coast representative. I don't see a team coming out of the Pac-12 with 2 losses or less than 2 losses.
Really?
I think this conference is the most balanced in about the top 6 of all the conferences. There's nobody that stands out. If you look at Oregon, if you look at, no one talks about losing a coach like Nick Aliotti, but you've now lost a big portion of the brain trust from the Chip Kelly era. No one gave enough credit to Nick Aliotti and the type of defense he created, essentially, to be able to defend while you play that type of offense. And everybody in college football is copying some form of what they did. I think he's a guy who was a difference maker like Chip Kelly, and I'm not so sure that you don't see that on the defensive side of the ball.
Aliotti retired at the end of last season, for the fans that aren't aware. So much talk about Oregon's offense, but their defense was spectacular. Deion Jordan, a bunch of guys have been drafted on that side of the ball. Who do you got?
I agree with Mark with Texas A&M. Their 5 road games are against teams that went to bowls last year. You look at the SEC last year, Florida was number 10, Georgia number 5. Both finished the season unranked, so I think you got to look at the SEC with 6 teams there. I think LSU is a possibility. LSU, 18 NFL draft picks they've lost the last 2 years. At some point, that has to catch up with Les Miles, but I think A&M and LSU, schedule-wise, have the hardest test.
Let me throw one more at you. Clemson. They lost 89% of their passing yards when Taj Boyd left, 53% of their receiving yards when Sammy Watkins and Martavius Bryant left, and 63% of their rushing yards when Hot Rod McDowell and Boyd left. So this is a team that opens the season at Georgia, plays defending BCS national champion Florida State on the road in week 4, and then hosts North Carolina, which might be better. If that team struggles early, is the new quarterback going to be good enough to bring them back?
I think they're 0-1 coming out of that Georgia game. I saw Georgia at the end of the season against Nebraska with the offensive talent that Georgia has coming back, the speed they have coming back, Malcolm Mitchell, some of those guys. I'm not sure that Clemson doesn't start out 0-1, and there you go down that slide potentially. Florida State come at the end of the month.
So you're talking about the Pac-12 essentially beating each other up. Texas A&M, we saw their schedule on the screen, just talking about how tough the competition is, minus Manziel and Evans. I'll go with Wisconsin. I'm just not convinced that a national championship team can be led by a guy like Joel Stave, who I think is just basically a placeholder. That's if he even ends up winning the job. I think Gary Anderson did a really nice job in his first year there, but I'm not sure they have the electric playmakers to make it happen.
Schedule, though, no Ohio State, no Michigan State, no Michigan, and no Penn State.
You know what, though, we're talking about the team. I agree with you, except that I think Bo Pelini's going to have his best team on record at Nebraska. We had that Capital One Bowl, Georgia against Nebraska. I've never seen Pelini more relaxed, more comfortable in his own skin, and with the team he had, he feels very settled. Amir Abdullah is an elite running back, and so you can build around that. They've built some depth on their offensive line, so in that division, I think Nebraska may be one that can sneak in there and maybe get into this conversation. I even said on the air during that game, I think you could look at Nebraska in the Big Ten championship next year.
A team that I think could slip up. I don't think they will, but if you look at their past history, they have really struggled in this role, and that's Oklahoma. They'll be ranked in the top 3 or 4 in the country. The last 2 times they were a top 4 team, in 2011 and 2012, they finished the year out of the top 10. They have actually finished lower in the final ranking than the preseason ranking in 11 of the past 13 years. Obviously, it's because they're so high up there. But are people reading too much into the game, the Sugar Bowl? Trevor Knight played off the charts, no question. Can they do that all season long?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens because you're in a situation with Oklahoma where the latest is the greatest. If you take out that Sugar Bowl, he had a very inconsistent regular season, was battling for the starting job all the way through. A reminder, if you want to see a little bit more on each of the 16 teams, you can log on right now to ESPN.com. And Mark actually has a really interesting Q&A on the college football playoff that he's posted answering all your questions about that.